Hello again, lovely listeners. This is Devon and my partner and co-host,
Vince Blue.
Vince Villark. There we go. And this is episode 8 of Untold Wealth, your favorite economic history podcast. And boy, do we have a good one for you this evening, or this afternoon, however, whenever you're listening. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, let me explain how this works. Vince and I were both economics nerds, and by that it means we studied a bit of economics when we were in university together, but the passion has truly lived on. And naturally, we decided to start a podcast, talk about all these topics we've been chatting about over the years with each other, and share it with the world for good or for bad. All right. So we come together, we theory craft some titles and ideas for the podcast. And we both go our separate ways and research that specific topic sentence independently. And then we come together, we chat about it, and it's always good fun. So, Vince, could you tell us this topic sentence for episode 8 of the
I
podcast?
would be happy to. This week's topic sentence is Here's why you're poor. Explained. Which
I mean,
it's very inflammatory, and I love it.
it's inflammatory. It's such a 21st century tagline. I mean, who's not going to click that when they're when they're scrolling through YouTube, right? Um, I feel like it also definitely got influenced by all these TikTokers nowadays that say they earn like $20,000 in
Yes.
12 hours or whatever. Um,
I
it's
think
it's right up there.
the
Mhm.
inspiration that I also got from it was there's some videos by Vox on YouTube that always have like da 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 explained. And
Explained. Oh, it's a classic.
here's why you're poor is just such a I think it's gonna be, you know, hopefully we deliver. I think we will. But
Well, let's see where we differed in why in why our listeners are poor. Apparently. Okay, so we haven't discussed these topics with each other,
nope.
but to give you some of my methodology behind my research, I was kind of thinking along the routes of I was going to tackle the financial system, and I came up with two reasons why I think people are poor today.
Okay.
One of them is quite grounded in reality, and the second one is a bit more abstract, and a bit more philosophical, if you will. My reason number one is you are poor because the financial sector is deliberately obtuse. And deliberately
Mm.
obtuse is one of my favorite lines from Shawshank Redemption, if some of you have watched that. But yeah, I mean, the financial sector honestly is just that word, deliberately obtuse. It makes no sense from an outsider's point of view. And even if you come from a financial background, I mean, Vince and I didn't study finance in in university, but we know of different instruments you can use. But there's such a stark difference between not knowing something, knowing of something, and then actively participating in in that thing, and specifically the financial sector. We
Absolutely.
know about options, we know about stops, we know about puts, we know about index funds, retirement annuities, but there's so much more that goes into it. Little tricks of the trade, sites you can use, different calculators, you know, even learning a bit of coding to, I mean, what's the word? Python. You
Mm.
can literally learn coding like Python to automatically withdraw funds and put it into different things. I mean, that's pretty advanced level stuff, right? But could you imagine? Vince and I know of these things, and myself, until about a year ago, I mean, finished studying a good few years ago now. I didn't know the ins and outs of that at all. I don't know if you feel the same way, Vince, but it's pretty incredibly daunting, even thinking about it. Coming to
Yeah.
terms with having to grapple with your finances is it's a challenge in and of itself. Like you have to be diligent with how you save and spend, and different banks and investment funds, and like, do I get a financial advisor? This is a heated topic, right? I mean, in hindsight, we kind of know that And guys, this is not financial advice. We should have definitely
We
prefaced
should
that at the beginning
very, very explicitly
of
say
this
this is not
podcast.
financial advice.
Yes, yes. We'll put that in the description. Not financial advice. But there's studies that go on that kind of say, these are the best things to do, and the best thing to do is pretty much never go against the market.
Right.
It's pretty much to invest in in funds, and some of you don't even know what funds are, and you're fine. Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. But basically, to invest in funds that cover a wide variety of asset classes, portfolios, equities, and things like that. Because research has shown that an individual trader, when they're day trading, when they're doing their own thing, and when they're trying to personally beat the market because they feel like they have better information, the market always wins. I think it was about 90% of the time, traders could not outperform the market. If someone just invested their money into an index fund, the likelihood is that they would come out on top if they were doing some one-to-one comparison.
Yeah. And speaking of the
So yeah, I don't know
people
if you have.
on TikTok, like everyone's proposing their specific way to beat the market and be part of that 10%. But the likelihood that they would even tell you if they did know how to beat the market is very unlikely. Basically zero, I'd say.
That's true. They're just making more competition for themselves. It's kind of like we're both gamers.
Hmm.
It feels like if you release that information, it's going to get patched. Some authority is going to hook onto it. Like crypto didn't get patched. There weren't really many laws governing crypto until it really blew up. Then governments got interested in taxing and tracking funds and things like that, right? No
Yeah.
crypto bro all the way back then would have wanted you involved. But
Crypto was
now
in
crypto
beta,
bros want you
basically.
to crypto was in beta, exactly. Good way of putting it. But now everyone wants you involved in crypto because they're worried about the value deteriorating even more. They need more eyes on it.
Yes.
It's kind of like a pyramid scheme. But okay, so that's the first reason I thought of. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Vince, in particular. If you have any anecdotes you can throw. But yeah,
I
I think the financial sector is tough, man.
I definitely agree. I think in my final year, I had some finance classes where we discussed a lot of things you mentioned earlier, various trading positions for stocks where, you bet that the stock will go down, you bet that it'll go up, you bet that it'll kind of stay around where it is now, and various instruments that they call it. But to like actually apply it, or rather to apply it and have it be effective in most cases and know when to use it is still something that I don't think even university level students would be able to do with some proficiency. And I definitely agree that
Mm,
there's a almost predatory financial advisor scheme where, if you want your money to be well maintained, more than likely the person that you're like giving access to the money to make trades and potentially give you X return per year is not going to be able to because, like you said, 90% of the people don't beat the market, and so
yeah.
it's. I swear I've seen so many
I,
videos where a chimpanzee or a goldfish or just like a random algorithm had outperformed some of the best traders in like a span of time in 6 months or 3 months, just because it's such a complex thing, the stock market and options and derivatives and all that, that there's no real secret to it. You just have to be either consistent or just be risk averse or diversify. There's no one trick that can make you rich.
I mean, exactly that. There literally is, and I even chatted to someone today at work, and they were like, "Have you seen this guy on TikTok? He's making like thousands by doing something," and shows me his TikTok, and I just have to tell him like, there's no get rich scheme in this world. Like
Absolutely.
money just doesn't appear. Like it takes hard work and luck, and you know then something will happen. But I love how you said it's this predatory scheme, and I love how you made reference to shorting, which is
Mm,
basically buying insurance on how stocks outcomes, which is betting against or betting for stocks.
yes.
And I tried to explain this to my girlfriend. Vince will know my girlfriend, but essentially my girlfriend is sixth-year medical student, basically a doctor, and I was trying to explain The Big Short to her. For those of you who haven't
I've
watched
had
The
this
Big Short,
conversation as
great
well.
film. Yeah, yeah, and The Big Short is all about a few different traders and fund managers betting against the housing market and betting that it will fail. So they were shorting the housing market. And that is eventually what happened. The housing market failed and the global financial crisis happened in 2008. But this idea that, and this shook my girlfriend, that you can just bet against anything in this world, but in a financy way, it's now called an instrument. Oh, no,
Yes,
no,
yes.
no, I'm not betting against something. No, 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 it's a financial instrument. It's an asset or it's a liability until it becomes, no, you're betting against something. And that, it's, I, I, I didn't know how to respond to that question from her. She was like, you can just bet against anything. I'm like, you know what? Like, yes. The same way if you buy health insurance, you're betting that at some point you will be sick. Those who don't buy health insurance are betting that they won't get sick and that the 3 or whatever percent they put in of their income per month is useless. Anyway, I do digress, but that was the point. That was my first point that I thought of. And there's an untold level of depth and intricacy there, but I didn't even want to go into that because I thought my second point and how I delved into it was so much more fun and interesting and thought provoking.
Before you carry
So,
on, I wanted to
mm,
ask, so do you think like these kind of industries in the financial sector deliberately use kind of obscured terminology or kind of tricksy language to kind of make things seem more complicated when it's literally, as your girlfriend said, just betting. Um, do you think that's part of it as well?
I it's a bit of both. There's definitely instruments and financial models that are indescribably smart
Mm.
and complex to set up and undertake, right? But also a large part of it is not that smart and it's just like gut feeling.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's deliberately obtuse. Like I said, it's deliberately obtuse, but it might not be, maybe to a certain extent. But it feels like there's some kind of deliberate obsolescence. I don't know if you've heard that. When manufacturers create a product, but they
Hmm.
create it to only last a specific amount of time, like you have to come
Oh,
back and buy a product. I don't know how that really applies, to be honest, but it feels like there's some nefariousness going on. There's people that just want to keep your money in this sector. I don't know.
absolutely.
I'm getting this kind of conspiratorial at this point, but it does at least feel that way. And if something feels that way for me, who knows of a lot, even if I don't practice it, I can only imagine what it feels to someone who isn't in as fortunate as a position as I am. So that's why I kind of phrased it in that manner.
I
But
see.
okay, cool. My second point. The second point as to why you're poor explained is you were born this way. It is as simple as that. In economics, there's these terms called systemic inequality, class mobility. Different countries have better or lower class mobility, so you could go from middle income to middle upper income more easily, and there's different indexes you can use to track that and how proficient countries are. But I want to go even deeper. All
Oh.
right. I want to talk about someone who we actually heard about when we were studying Vince, who thought really deeply about this. Um, Let me give you some clues and see if you can remember who this person is.
Okay.
Give you a
Okay.
quote. How about that? How about I'll give you a quote? You're good at quotes. I'll give you a damn quote, and I like this quote. A just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you'd be willing to enter it in a random place.
Oh my
That
god.
give you s- does that give you some inkling?
The my brain just unlocked like this graph where I just that like spawned memory of this graph that we learned about the specific topic where it's kind of like a I'm
I
gonna
don't even know what graph you're referring to. I'm embarrassed, but if you're talking about the same guy, you must. show me
The
this graph afterwards.
yeah,
Hmm.
it's essentially just like a. Okay, I'm going to do a terrible job of describing it, so I'm just going to take
But
a
okay,
guess at.
you can't guess just yet, but
Okay,
you have
okay,
an inkling right now.
I think so.
This is someone who is considered one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century.
Hmm.
Um, he is someone that was a lecturer at Harvard, a professor at Harvard, rather, a professor at Princeton, Harvard until he retired. Someone who got two prizes, one for, I think, what was it? Some humanities prize in 1999. But he's quite a distinguished person, but a philosopher that had a unique interest in economics. And I'm about to say his name, and I want to see if you can figure out where I'm going with this. His
Okay,
name was John Rawls. Have you heard
okay.
of this?
I
John
that
Rawls?
that was the name in my brain. I don't remember him specifically.
Okay, you're thinking of someone else, but please let's chat about this someone else you were talking about because I love looking at graphs and how they explain. But all right, Rawlsian philosophy. This is a gentleman, John Rawls, American born, American stayed really, very influential at his time. And he actually participated uh, in World War II. He came back, completed his PhD, and wrote a book. Okay, it's called A Theory of Justice. Actually, just let me look if that's correct. A Theory of Justice. Yes, Theory of Justice, John Rawls. I got it correct. I'm so smart, even though I didn't write it in my notes.
And this is to do
But
with
okay,
like the where you're placed at birth, or like the just
where you're
society.
placed at birth, right? Exactly. So John Rawls, he really wanted to dig deep and use economic thinking to figure out how we as a population could build a just society, right? And he ended up coming up with such a unique uh, it's a thought experiment, right? But it's
Okay.
something more. Okay. His thought experiments is colloquially called the veil of ignorance. Does that ring a bell to you? We learned about this in business ethics
Very slightly. It has been a few years.
very slightly, but cool. His basic premise was that according to the difference principle, and for those of you who don't know what the difference principle is, it's one of the two principles, main principles he covered in his theory of justice. The first was uh, liberalism and the democracy rules. I could be
Mm.
wrong about that one. But the second, the difference principle was that if a law is passed in society, the lowest that society have to at least benefit from it, right? So no law could pass that doesn't have to necessarily equally apply to everyone, but it should favor those at the lowest end of the spectrum, or at the very least benefit them. So it can't just benefit those at the top. This
So
is
like
what
a
he
social
coined the
program.
difference. Yes, yes. He was very much inspired by John Locke, who came up with the social contract. The social contract is basically describes how a society, after a certain amount of time, will start creating norms. Just like how if you walk in the street, it's not a societal norm to shout out loud about pretty much anything, although it's perfectly legal to do within reason, I suppose.
Mm.
Things that these societal contracts aren't illegal, but they're definitely there. There are preferences in society. So he kind of drew from John Locke's teaching, and this thought experiment, right? He described it as if someone wants to figure out the most objectively good positioning for society or a specific situation is that they have to purposefully become ignorant of their own upbringing and circumstance. All right? The way he described this is that one would have to come from their circumstance, pass a veil of ignorance, and sit in their original position before they knew who they were, what their race is, how their upbringing, their wealth, their inequality, their lack of inequality. I don't know, it doesn't matter. They just had to completely forget who they were, present
Interesting.
within themselves with a situation, and if they were any random person on earth, they could be the poor person in a situation, they could be the rich person in a situation, they could be somewhere in the middle. But the very key thing is they know they can be any one of those people. So if you're in this original position, what would your choice for the outcome of the situation be?
Right.
Now, this is very interesting because economics, and I told you he was very interested in economics. Economics is very much driven by an assumption that humans are self-interested.
Hmm.
Okay? Humans in general will go for their best outcomes. But if you think of someone who's past the veil of ignorance and is sitting in their original position, how do they know their best outcome? They could be anyone in a specific situation. They could be the person who, in today's standards, would be looked at, unfavorably, or who would have a bad outcome.
Interesting.
He took it even a step further. He said all the souls on earth, if they wanted to create a better civilization, a better economic structure, if they all, before the earth was born, passed this veil of ignorance and sat in the original position, how would the earth look if they constructed it? Because if you think about it, all of the original positions, everyone there, self-interestedly, would want to create the fairest earth there is, because they could be a child of a slum. They could be a noble man's wife, for example. Like, it doesn't really matter. Um, but the self-interest would lead them to coming to the most fair and just society, because they would essentially all be scared of making it too unjust, because they could
Right.
be on the other end of the spectrum, right? They forgot their past selves. They could be they could be slumdog. They could be some impoverished child on the streets. Yeah, so that's John Rawls, and I really like that because it has such a strong economic backing. Like, okay, economics assumes this. Humans are self-interested. Let's put humans in this thought experiment. Bam. Let's have self-interest fuel a just society instead of wrecking it apart like it usually does, like greed usually does. Um, did any of that ring a bell to you?
It really did. Not like the broad overview of it really did, but not the specific points that you mentioned. But the idea that it's such a fascinating idea. I mean, it really goes to show that it is such a shame that we don't have that almost full information of where we're going to be born or otherwise end up in, because I think absolutely everyone would, out of their own self interest, push for something more of an equal situation, and that
Yeah.
idea of self interest ending or causing a greater good for the
Mm.
economy, I feel like also pops up in other economic theories, um, whether it be demand and supply or like the invisible hand. I feel like it's an interesting thought experiment where self interest can lead to a fair scenario for everybody, which is a little bit
Aligning
counterintuitive.
people's interests, man. Yeah, it feels counterintuitive. I completely agree. But this one was just so stark to me because you can actually use this thought experiment anywhere, right? If you look at it, if you, let's say something happens in your life, you just and you're conflicted on how you should respond or how you should have responded. You just take a step back, forget who you are for a second, quite literally. Try to do that to the best of your ability, and then assess the situation as if you were everyone and no one at the same time.
Yeah.
Really weird stuff. Like, I for this podcast, as soon as I thought a bit more deeply about it, this jumped out to me as the most interesting thing I can speak about because it actually touched me when I was learning about it first. I did really like how that self-interest fuels a just society.
I think
Would you
economics as well
recreate
really.
society? And mm-hmm.
I think it would. Oh, I would, sorry. Especially given the circumstance that I would have the power to kind of redistribute things in a more fair way. But yeah, I think economics, out of all kind of sciences, if you could even call it that, has a real deep root in philosophy, just because you're dealing with people in most cases. Um, and I think it's one of a lot of topics where looking at it from a philosophical point of view kind of gives you the answer, Um, like when you were talking about it now, kind of putting yourself out of the situation or like removing your identity, it like made me think of the term of ego in Buddhism and like how you can get rid of that feeling of identity and you'll have like a better life overall, or at least you won't be
Mm.
as affected by things. Um, but it's a
Yeah,
very
like
interesting.
stoicism is it lends itself. I mean, he was a philosopher for a reason, hey? He really this strikes you hard when you think about it, man.
No, absolutely.
But yeah, those are my two reasons why you're poor. And I may have done a poor job explaining them, but I explained it nonetheless. So yeah, Vince, have what have you cooked for us, King? What have you
I
been stirring in your research? I'm very interested.
I think you did a great job. I think when it comes to this topic, there's no single thing that we can present that will answer the question entirely. We can only look at little small slices of why you're poor. Every time I say it, I find myself giggling at how silly of a title it is.
Someone's gonna. I want one of our audience members to snip it, like cut it out and put it as like a sound bite in a TikTok video. Like just take it out of context completely.
But yeah, for my topic, I want to re-emphasize that there's a lot of things that determine someone's socio-economic status. From, like, as you said, where you're born or the living situation, the economic conditions that you're in, and other big picture stuff that we're never going to be able to cover entirely. But the reason that I chose the topic that I chose today is not only because it's super interesting, but I have a little bit of a personal connection to a part of it. And I'm going to be chatting about wages, and specifically the minimum wage, and also the newly created, or at least relatively new, gig economy. But
Huh.
do you know the gig economy? Do you know what that is?
No, no, I don't know what that is.
Okay. Well, while I have you on the edge of your seat, I will start off with wages and the concept of a minimum wage. This concept of having a base pay that companies to give to their employees isn't that new, or rather, like it's not as recent as you might think. But it came
Hmm.
about around the 1800s, where you had this push of industry with the Industrial Revolution, things kind of slowly beginning to get to a point of production that was unseen beforehand. This idea that these businessmen would have to pay their labor, which is one of the most expensive parts of the production process, a set rate, wasn't really taken well by businessmen of the era, nor by economists either. The economic thought at the time was that if you increase the wages of your workers, then by sheer laws of supply and demand, which is what they were working with at the time, there would be more unemployment as a result, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. But the basic premise is that if you had set a essentially a price floor for your labor, the price of the goods produced by that labor would be higher than the natural equilibrium of the supply and demand graph. And so, seeing that, owners and businessmen in those industries wouldn't hire as many workers as a result, and unemployment would increase. But as time went on, the idea of a minimum wage became more and more prominent, and after a few decades or so, it was actually implemented in several countries over time. The very first was New Zealand in 1838, and by America, basically a century later, which confounded me that America only had a minimum wage in like the 1940s, basically. Um,
I saw that when I was researching John
really,
Rawls, actually. Yeah,
it's
yeah. He did some commentary about it in some of
was
his
he
later work.
for or
But
against
yeah,
the
it
minimum
was
wage?
no, he was very full. He was very full. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, goated man then. It's a base take, but Yeah, so to combat the effects of the Great Depression and other economic factors, America also implemented a minimum wage. And soon they saw that this had a quick success when economic studies were done. And soon countries like Australia, Uruguay, and the rest of Europe also implemented them. And overall, it's been a good thing. Those countries in particular, Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, and Europe, have done a good job not only maintaining the minimum wage, but keeping it up to date with inflation, which is a big talking point. So they regularly update their policies, have talks with unions about what their workers need and what their workers are worth. But if we want to look at a not so great example of the minimum wage being kind of maintained, we only need to look at America. And there are two main key factors that Americans and certain other parts of the world are very poor with regards to the minimum wage. The minimum wage currently, as it stands, the federal minimum wage, is $7.25 per hour. This kind of changes depending on where you are in America. Certain states have it higher, but the base that you have to pay, no matter what, is $7.25. And this has been around since 2009. That has been the base floor for over 12 years, which, if you kind of think about
the federal rate hasn't changed for 12 years.
Yes.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and if you think about the
I can't believe that.
economic things that have happened since 2009, you're like, maybe that should change. But it's even worse than you think, because in all honesty, the Americans who are earning the minimum wage right now are getting a very bad deal. Because if you take that minimum wage and kind of put it on a graph over time, and then change all the numbers to real terms, as in what they would be worth today, the money that they're earning now is the lowest that minimum wage workers have earned for over 80 years. Because at one point, for example, in 1968, if we convert the minimum wage to today's terms, they'd be earning about $13.46. How crazy is this?
It makes my blood boil, to be honest with you. It's just insane. I'm not even from America, and you just hear the horror stories just constantly, man.
It really is. And to me, the question of why you're poor, I think maybe because I had seen things about the minimum wage, really struck me as the most obvious choice. But kind of diving deeper into it, it struck me as really strange of why on earth has this minimum wage kind of stayed bottlenecked at such a low rate since the 1950s, essentially?
Can I hazard a guess?
Go
So
for it.
I'm not saying this is justified at all, but a potential reason
Okay.
why I could see a government not being super keen on keeping inflation or keeping their wages tied to inflation, quite hand in hand, is because in their eyes it probably becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They're giving a substantial, they're essentially inflating money a substantial degree by increasing minimum wage, because the minimum wage affects a lot of
Right.
people in a society, right? Lots of people are on minimum wage. That will have a
I agree.
substantial impact on money supply and money demand, which will likely increase inflation even further, right? So I could see why they wouldn't want to, but it's a bit of a rubbish reason, because it's a minimum wage for a reason. The minimum wage is there to stop people from getting
Yeah.
exploited. But you're kind of just hiding the exploitation behind the skies of listen, it's actually bad for everyone if we increase your
Right.
minimum wage. I don't know, that's just some reason that I was thinking.
I think that's fair. I think that there's other things that the government could be doing to make the lives easier of people who are earning a minimum wage that doesn't directly have to be increasing it. But like researching it further, what really confused me about like why perhaps the minimum wage hasn't changed, especially in the context of the fact that since the 1950s, comparing the global production, or if we're just looking at America, the Americas uh, production has exponentially increased overall. Their output and on kind of a global scale has shot up exponentially. I was curious why that part of it didn't influence the minimum wage. And so I took a look at perhaps maybe this was a trend for all workers at all levels of a company. Maybe nobody was kind of reaping the fruits of this increased production. So I took a look at the wages of CEOs over the same period of time. And I actually want to play a little bit of a game with you here. So in 1964, a CEO generally made 20 times more than the typical worker, not a minimum wage worker, just a typical worker. How much do you think uh, in 2020, how much more do you think CEOs earned?
So I think I actually did see the statistic, but I want to see if I can remember it.
Okay.
I was gonna be all smart and guess a rough number, but now I think I might have got it wrong. So I think it's something like 330 to 350 times. Like it's so I think I heard
That
300
is,
in there.
yes,
Hmm.
really close.
88.
398%. Um, 398.
98. Oh my god.
So basically 400% more than the typical worker. So if you can see the picture I'm painting, the reason why you might be poor is because a lot of the fruits of the production that a majority of the labor doesn't go to the laborers themselves, but only the kind of wealthy elite that has been slowly growing their wealth as the economy has exponentially grown. And I don't feel like I'm saying anything
But
revolutionary
Vince,
here.
what about trickle down economics? Think about it, man. Do you know, apparently, trickle down economics, that phrase was coined by a comedian who was making fun of, of
Oh,
wealth inequality. That could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I saw that on Reddit. And, you know, people defend that phrase to the death. And I'm just like, if that's really the origin of that phrase, that is the funniest thing ever. Like, I can't believe it. But okay. But is it percent? Did you
it's
say percent or
insane.
times? Like 398 times or 398% more? I just
It would, sorry, 398
times more. Okay.
times.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So the picture I'm painting here is that compared to at least the 60s, uh, be it because of macroeconomic and other policy changes that essentially tax the wealth less or tax the wealth more during those times, we live in a society, which is a terrible thing to start off a sentence with, where the low to middle class workers are poorer than they've ever been, or at least they're not getting as much of the pie as they used to. So, this pretty awful situation that workers are living in today, there's some ways to get around it, but they're not the kind of equitable ways that we were speaking about earlier. There are other things that workers have to do in order to pay their bills and essentially get themselves above the line when the minimum wage just keeps getting worse and worse over time. But before I get over to the gig economy, I want to start off with a quote, as per usual, quote for a quote. Um, I want to ask what you think of this quote in particular. So it says, "The gig economy is empowerment. This new business paradigm empowers individuals to better shape their own destiny and leverage their existing assets to their benefit." I'm not going to tell you who said it just yet, but
What
what
the
do you
hell
think?
is the gig economy? It sounds like a pyramid scheme, but is it
Mm,
someone taking on multiple jobs? Is that what it is? Is it? Is that the
yes.
gig? Are you doing different
So,
gigs?
kind of. But what do you think of the idea of the gig
I
economy? The gig economy is essentially kind of like side hustles.
I I don't know what it is, Vince. I can't give any thought. Such I
Okay,
can't.
no problem, no
If it is
problem.
what I think it is, it's somewhere between Yas Queen and that's pretty sad that you have to do that. Like somewhere in the middle there. Like 'cause I feel like it's definitely frowned upon that people can do more things than one, but there's kind of a reason that you
Sure.
shouldn't put yourself in so many positions, right? I don't
Yeah, I feel like it was a little unfair making you.
know.
I suppose I thought you would kind of have an idea of what the gig economy is. But this quote in particular is by John McAfee, um, who's not a geek guy by any means. And it was a bit of a misdirect because we're going to be talking about, as you kind of slightly alluded to, how terrible the gig economy is, and maybe another reason why you're poor, in addition to the minimum wage.
Damn.
But to give you the full picture and not ask you any questions about what the gig economy is before you even know what it is, uh, here's the context. Before like the 2010s, you maybe had two types of employment. You had full-time jobs and you had part-time jobs. And then as we kind of move through that decade, a new type of work enters into the market that becomes a staple alternative, but also addition to people's income. Freelancing, essentially. This kind of new form of work has recently exploded, and the global freelance platform, this market, is expected to reach about $12 billion by 2028. And a large portion of this mainly freelancing economy is centered in the United States, where about 36% of their workers say that they freelance, which mainly comprises of
I was
e-hailing
gonna
like
say Uber,
Uber.
but
Um,
36%. Wow.
exactly. Yes. Or things like Airbnb. That might also broaden the idea of what freelancing could be. And to be fair to freelancing, this type of work where you're not necessarily employed by a company or an industry, you are
You're
employed by
like a
yourself.
contractor for them, right? You're like a contractor that has to meet their standards. Like
Exactly.
how stuffed up, how mad does that sound? Like, no, you just meet our standards as a company, but we'll allow you to freelance for us. Haha.
Contractors, exactly that. But before we get to like the negatives of it, there are some perks to give it some credence. You are independent and you can set your own hours. And I think in this kind of contemporary setting, a lot of those qualities are very attractive to workers, being able to work on things that you want to do, not being, held by the man in whatever business you're in, having to appease a boss that you don't really like. And while it does require some more responsibility, setting your own hours is also a very useful thing to do if you have a dynamic kind of household where you have to take care of children and such. But there are certain negatives that are becoming more and more apparent that companies are pushing down contractors and freelancers' throat. As you mentioned, there's a lot of there's a lot of power in the companies in that they, as you said, can choose to just not employ you. You have to adhere to their standards, and it's very open to exploitation. Freelancers are consistently paid lower rates uh, than kind of workers who are employed by businesses, as you can imagine, as well as not having the employee rights and benefits that you would have working at a company, such as health insurance, your retirement fund, many sort of things that protect you. Discrimination don't come with freelancing. You also don't have a stable income because, in many cases, working on a gig, if we take Uber, for example, you might not get any trips because of environmental situations. It could be raining a lot, people don't want to go out. Or in the case of Airbnb, uh, you just might not have a home that people are interested in renting. Um, but nevertheless, you don't have a lot of benefits that working at a company grants you. And they did a study where they took Uber in particular and kind of averaged out how much Uber drivers earn, specifically in America, if you took it to an hourly wage. And it turned out to be around $12. But keep in mind, you don't have the benefits, you don't have sick leave. There's nothing that Uber really provides you as a contractor that you would otherwise get from working at a proper company. And so this discussion of exploitation and low pay for contractors is becoming more and more a realization that gig work is almost this thing that you have to do in some cases because of this minimum wage, but it's not a great position to be in for a majority of people who do it. Any thoughts on that so far?
A lot of thoughts, but the biggest one was that I know Uber's been in some lawsuits and stuff, especially in California and LA. I mean, I know their business model dies if minimum wage laws get applied to their drivers and things like that. So that was one thing. But the second thing is that it's so hard. Okay, I'm not saying it's hard as a consumer. Let me rephrase that. It's just grasping, because I like Uber. I like the convenience. I like how cheap
Yes,
it is. I want it to stay as an individual, right? I think we can both agree on that, right? Like, it's convenience. Why would I want that price to
absolutely.
increase? But it's why the model works. But when you see behind the window and you see what's happening, it makes you want to stop. And it's so hard to dissociate yourself from what you want and what should be. It's like the whole, like, do you tip someone at a bloody restaurant, man? Like, oh my word. It's just this kettle of worms that you don't even want to think about. You just want to pay the tip and just like go away and just, hope you don't have to think about that horrible situation that servers and waiters are in many countries, right? Same with Uber. I want to press the
Absolutely.
button. I want the ease of convenience, but I also want them to have better pay and better working standards and benefits. But crossing that bridge and self-actualizing that is tough. These are kind of unsolvable problems because I mean you explained a situation where productivity actually increased when the minimum wage was implemented, right? But that was for a society. So, like, what happens if minimum wage gets implemented for Uber? Does it? Maybe I'm predicting it to just doom and gloom and fall, like Uber is promising it will, but maybe something doesn't happen. Maybe the demand for on the go shuttle services is high enough to keep it alive and relatively cheap. I don't know.
I think there's like a socialist part in me that basically says like in a lot of cases what was said about the minimum wage, oh, it's just going to create more employment, and then it ended up being better for not just workers but society as a whole to implement that minimum wage when there wasn't one before. I think the overview, I suppose, that I got from looking at the minimum wage and the gig economy was that there's this kind of adaptation that low to middle class workers now have to do because there's not enough for them in the economy. They're earning a minimum wage, but in most cases, that isn't enough to uh, cover things like their healthcare or if they, have children to cover those expenses and things like that. And so, as you mentioned with waiters, it's like this kind of cultural norm now to like, oh, you're not getting paid enough. So you have to subsist off my gratitude to make a living and actually, have a decent life instead of the restaurant or whoever just paying you a decently hourly wage. And that kind of parallels to what I'm seeing with gig economy, in that people aren't earning enough. So instead of being granted more of that slice of pie as companies are earning more, as CEOs are earning times and times and times more than their typical worker, is that they're just being told to get another job, drive for Uber in your spare time. But even that, I think, is not really a good and real solution to
Yeah,
the issue. I mean, my solution would just be like take the profits from a company and be like, okay, a portion of this, a large portion of this, goes to the people who have like
but
a considerable
that
part
is
of it.
what a systemic
Big,
flaw is. When someone sees all the choices
yes,
presented to them and none of them benefit them enough, especially in proportion to what the other person is getting, that is a systemic, you know, flaw of a society. 100%. You know, you're being exploited for your.
yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Exploited is a big word, right? But you're not benefiting. Like you are putting in time, effort. I mean, I'm not even want to get into the labor theory of value, right? But it's absurd when
mm,
every single avenue available to you is just propping up someone's mountain of wealth. That's tough, man. That's
yeah.
really tough. I'm not in that position, but I can think of a few things worse. Um, Rawls, where's John Rawls? We need him.
I think it's we need to just reset.
Yeah,
Let's just reset him. But this I kind of had the gig economy in particular. I had a personal connection to because I've worked in some capacity within the gig,
yes, you
um,
have.
and I can attest to the fact that like the whether it be the platform that I worked for or the companies and clients that I was like being serviced to work for, there's a lot of these things that like echoed. I think, I mean, to be fair, actually, even the work that I do now, it's technically a contractor now that I think about it, because I do get paid time off and sick leave and things like that, but there's no kind of like health insurance or retirement plan or anything like that that I am like having
Yeah,
contributed
there's no
by the company
deductions
I
that you
work
have
for.
to do. There's no contributions. It's just, yeah, I think that's so many. I mean, listen, I haven't been in the job market for ages, right? We're both pretty young guys,
Mm.
but like, I don't know what the norms are. Like, no one's really told me the norms. So if this is our introduction into kind of working society, and we end up thinking these are the norms, like, you got to feel like people up top are going to just keep pushing their luck, you know? Keep being like, okay, let's push these positions back a little bit. Not necessarily in terms of maybe wages, but benefits, sure. It's a good thought, yeah.
Yes. The good news is that I think there are kind of discussions about this currently, and I think there are, especially at least in the United States and some other countries as well, there's talks about like how contractors can get or rather avoid a lot of these things that we mentioned, whether it be exploitation or not having like bargaining power on how much they should charge and the benefits that they receive while they're in their term of employment with companies. That I think should hopefully change within the next couple of years as this new form of work becomes kind of a staple for a lot of people. Even though realistically, I don't like the idea of it being kind of like this thing that you have to
It's
do,
so
you
crazy
know?
because the States always flaunts their very low unemployment rates. And you just told me that 38% of laborers, or 36 or something like that, are, are
Yes.
freelancers. Like, whoa.
They
they
do freelancing
on
on
top.
top of their
Oh my
work.
goodness, it's too much, man. And they're probably still struggling. Yeah, that's mad.
Yeah. But it's a bit of a somber tone. Do you want a fun little fact to kind of
Give
lift the
me a
mood a
fun
little
little
bit?
fact, man. Give it to me. I need it. I need it injected
Okay.
into me. We called it copium.
So the term freelance, do you want to guess what kind of
The
coined the term?
origins of the word freelance. Sure. Okay. Okay, lance. What is a lance? It's an object. It's a spiky object.
Hmm.
Free. Is it? Was it like a horseman that used to go to fairs and used to joust people? Like just. Is it?
Oh,
Don't tell me that's correct. It's not correct. Like that's what I would think. That's my
so
origin story in my mind.
are you saying so like a person would like show up to
Yeah,
fairs and be
like
like,
a
"Oh, I'll
tawny.
pay if you pay
Yeah,
me
yeah, yeah,
to."
yeah. He's our
I
freelancer of the tour.
see,
I
I
don't know,
see.
man. Like it made sense when I thought of it.
I I really like that definition, but unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
not the correct one. Um, so the story goes in the 1800s, there was a battle going on between two English knights.
I
One
was
of them
right
was a
about
lord,
knights. I
and
was listen.
you were. And this knight was facing off against this lord, both of them powerful combatants, and epic battle. Lord ends up taking the win, and the knight that kind of was leading this army takes his lance and offers it to the Lord, and he basically says like, "Me and my army are yours for the taking." And so they essentially became lancers for this guy. And after the war was done, they didn't have any work. So they just went around basically being
Mm,
mercenaries, offering their lance for anyone who would pay them. And yeah, offering the services of their
neat,
freelancers.
neat man. I was shockingly close. I'm astounded.
You were. I mean, I actually like your definition better, to be honest. Just the idea of a guy showing up and like, "Do you
Just
want to see
like
this cool trick?
yeah,
If
yeah,
you
yeah.
pay me,
All of
I'll."
these tawnies, like I'm really good. Like look at my CV, bro. I was, I made the crowd cheer for me at all of these tawnies, man. But that is it's a nice anecdote. But all right, sure, man. That was a
Yeah,
long episode. Wow, we we chatted for a while there,
I think
for
that was our
sure,
longest so
for
far.
sure. And yeah. Do you want to end us off, man?
I will. Here's why you're poor. Is a very very interesting topic, as you've heard us talk about it. And I think there's a lot of other things that we didn't mention about kind of socioeconomic factors, many sort of little things that you might not even really know that contribute to essentially putting down a lot of people's livelihoods. So I recommend you go check that out. Maybe, it might influence who you vote for or some policies that you want to enact in the future because, hells yeah, you can make that change if necessary. Also, keep in mind that this is not financial advice, but nevertheless, I hope you found this episode entertaining. Please do hit us with a follow, rate us 5 stars. It really helps us, whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever platform that you're listening to this on, YouTube even. Give us a like and a subscribe, please. And yeah, I hope to catch you all next time. This has been Vince, and
Yeah, and this has been Devon. And tell us why you're poor in the comments down below. We'd love to hear it. Other than that, guys, from the Untold Wealth crew, we'll see you in the next one. See ya.
cheers.